Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the December 18th meeting of Economic Matters. Currently in the room is myself and Alderman Savage. Before we approve the agenda, I would like to remove O1124, the Tenant Displacement Fund. Can I get a second on that?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
So moved.
Second. All in favor of the agenda as amended?
Aye.
All right. First up, approval of the Economic Matters minutes from November 20th.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great. So up first is O3124, Mobile Food Service Vendors Signage. Alderman Savage, this is your legislation. We do have an amendment if you'd like to speak to that first, or you can speak to the legislation as a whole first. Your choice.
Yes, real quick on the legislation as a whole. The only thing that spurred this was simply I noticed some food trucks had some flashing light signs blinking all night long, and normally that's prohibited if they're a brick and mortar store, and found out that there are basically no regulations on signs when it comes to food trucks. So this is an effort to basically hold them to a similar standard as brick and mortar stores.
Thank you. And would you like to get into amendment number 1?
Yes, sir. Well, I guess I'll move that first.
Second.
And so this amendment would address some of the public comments we received, some concerns that it was over-regulating some of the sandwich board signs and would prohibit and I guess impact some their business in that regard, and also addresses some concern that they wanted to make sure they could have LCD menus on display screens, and so we removed some of that conflicting language.
Thank you. I like this amendment. I think it is a very good compromise. Sandwich boards and LCD menus were some of the complaints that I had also gotten from some of the food truck vendors, including the Smash Up Burgers, a near and dear one that operates in my ward and near and dear to my heart, mostly due to high cholesterol. So I appreciate this compromise. 25 feet does sound reasonable. If some of them reach out later and go, hey, this is actually not quite far enough, we can deal with that later.
Yeah,
but I think for
so.
right now, in purposes of this meeting, this is great, and I think this is a really good start. So I'll accept a motion for a favorable recommendation.
So moved.
I shall second. All those in favor of Amendment 1? Aye. So do I have a favorable recommendation for O1124 as amended?
So moved.
I shall second. All in favor? Aye. O3124 is given a favorable recommendation as amended. As I said, I run brutally efficient meetings, gentlemen. So if we could please get our folks from the Fire Marshal's office up for O3224, the fire sprinkler systems requirement. So, gentlemen, I appreciate you guys joining us. We're probably going to have some questions that are more related to the fire sprinkling process as a whole rather than towards this legislation in the grand scheme of things. But something that we do have an issue with here in the city of Annapolis is we have had regulations put in for good intentions, but they end up making it very difficult for buildings to operate effectively, and that does hurt our economic process overall. Now, we want to try and strike a good balance between safety, because sprinklers do make buildings objectively safer. And when you live in an historic city where buildings are connected, and if a fire breaks out and goes to another one, it can burn down a large block. We do not want that. But at the same time, we need to acknowledge that the sprinkler process is an expensive one and can add a lot of revenue costs to building owners, and that gets passed on to the businesses and residents where they're operating. And how we thread the needle is part of governance. So, gentlemen, if you wouldn't mind explaining just how the process goes, what the timeline is. If I'm a building operator and I do not have my building sprinklered at the time, I have a tenant on the bottom floor and I want to have a residential tenant on the top floor. It's currently not sprinklered. What the process would be, what I would go through, and then how long that would take me with your office.
So I would recommend, first off, hiring either as the business
Make sure
owner.
your mic is on, or
Yes, please go ahead and make sure your mic is on. If you can also please say your name and position with the city for the record.
My name is Charles Ruth. I work for the City of Annapolis Fire Marshal's Office.
Charles is our fire protection engineer for the city of Annapolis. I'm Captain Bud Zapata. I oversee the fire marshal's office here in the city of Annapolis.
Thank you.
So I'd recommend that the business owners consult with an architect teamed up with the fire protection engineer if they're subdividing the building into commercial and residential. You get a break on the sprinkler design on the residential portion. It makes it cheaper and less invasive on the residential portion if you can separate the building appropriately. You don't know that that has happened and probably has not with a historic building until you team up with an architect or a fire protection engineering group. Once you have that in place, then you're going to have to get your subs underneath of those, your sub MEPs, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, to potentially do bid documents. So they're going to come in and you're going to need plumbing, your water to come in from the city main. You're going to need electrical. You're going to need the architectural to design any renovations you might need. And you're going to need sprinkler and fire alarm. All sprinkler systems are going to be required to have monitoring through fire alarm. That process probably takes a few months. And there may be some iterations back and forth between the architectural team and the building owner because there's going to be variables or options that they can select. Once you do develop the bid documents, like I said, that could be several months or even a year before the whole process gets vetted out. You're going to bid the project out to the different trades, and it may take several months before, like 2-3 months before the teams are ready to submit for permit. The approval process for the permit between the building permit and the trade permits may be two months or so because you're going to want to get the building permit approved first, and then your trades come in after that.
Now, gentlemen, if you don't mind me quickly interrupting, when you say the bid documents, that takes about months to a year. That has before it even hits the government side of the process yet, correct? That's still just entirely on the private sector where it's the building owner going to private architects, private sprinkler installers. City government has not gotten involved yet entirely.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Continue.
So once your contractors, they submit the building permit, that would probably take, the quickest that would be is I'd say about 5 weeks before they can get an approval. They may get a revise and resubmit, and then get a resubmittal, and then final approval just on the building permit. When they get the building permit, they actually usually get the plumbing permit, the electrical and mechanical. Well, there won't be much mechanical. Depends on what they're doing with dry pipe systems or something like that. If they need dry pipe systems, they're probably going to need a mechanical permit as well. But those fall in place right under the building permit, so that's really not a time lag on those trades. The trades that are going to cost a little bit of time is going to be the fire alarm and the sprinkler. And our standard turnaround is usually around 2 weeks when they submit to us for the first review. If we have comments, then it may take another 2 weeks.
So if you guys have comments, it would take about 4 weeks in total, approximately a month.
And that's optimistic. 4 weeks, yeah. So up to a month at least. But they have to. If we have comments, they're going to have to address the comments, revise the drawings, and resubmit them. So that's going to be a little bit of time on their part.
Okay. Now, something that was asked of me by a business owner, or not a business owner, by a property owner downtown, who said that the wait time was a long time for resubmittals. He said the biggest issue that he had wasn't the initial investment of the installation of fire sprinklers. He acknowledged that's expensive, but he wants to take care of his tenants, be they commercial or residential. But he said one of the biggest headaches was if they submit something and it gets sent back. Now, if you guys are saying it only takes about 2 weeks from your end, I'm guessing that's possibly on planning and zoning's part. We all know horror stories from our city's process and permitting. But what I want to know is, do we have the resources to send to, one, either send someone from our department with as an inspection the first time so that we can make sure that like plans are done correctly the first time so that we don't have to deal with resubmissions, or at least go over plans in person, via Zoom, just some way to make sure plans are done accurately the first time.
So I will say that planning, and I won't speak for planning and zoning, but I know that we have done things together, what you call pre-app meetings. So like Chuck was saying earlier, if they have a architect and a design team that's going to come in and do this for this specific building, they can set up pre-app meetings with our offices, and we sit down with them, and they bring plans to the table. They bring, hey, we're having, this particular room has this challenge. We're thinking about resolving it with this. And what we do is say, hey, you guys are heading in the right direction. Yes, this is something that we can do. And they even bring their code books. So we can definitely do something like that, do pre-app meetings to sit down with them and discuss these things to try to have not require those revisions per se. That doesn't mean that, that what they submit is totally different than what we have talked about, because they'll bring a simple layout, but then, when they design something, they probably miss something, and then if we see it during our review, we say, hey, this needs to be revised because you missed it,
So in the review process, are you physically going through the building itself then?
We're looking at the sprinkler system throughout the building.
Okay, so the pre-op meeting is good to know. I do think that's a very handy feature, but because we're looking at plans itself, what I'm wondering is, do we have the resources then? And if the answer is no, we don't have the resources, then that's the answer. I guess we could follow up with what would it take to get the resources. But do we have the resources to do an initial walkthrough with the building where it's like, if you want to get this after a pre-op meeting, let's say, they submit the plan and then you can like maybe walk through and go, okay, here's where we foresee an issue. This is where you should put the thing in. And that way, before they even submit the plan, have to wait that 2 weeks and get a resubmission, they can kind of alter it on their side before it's even submitted. Do we have the resources to do that?
No.
Okay, thank you. The pre-op meeting, though, is a very helpful feature. How many of our building owners are aware of this? Is this something we advertise?
Usually architects are aware of that. Business owners, building owners, probably not, but that's something that we can work on relaying that information. I know that Chuck made like a cheat sheet for the Main Street fire sprinkler requirements. I believe we shared with you to just kind of FAQs basically. One of the things we can do is we can work with economic development to try to just give them like a step-by-step on what they need to do. Have your, contact, architect, contractors. We can set up a pre-app meeting. This is the person you want to contact. This is the number you contact. We set it up and we go from there.
Thank you. Because this is a very handy tool, and unfortunately, if not many building owners are aware of it, they may not know how to use it. So that is questions I have for now. Alderman Savage, do you have questions on either the legislation specifically or the sprinkler process itself?
Yes. So if I'm reading this correctly, okay, so there's no real trigger. It just sounds like it's like the original law, which was passed in 2007, it looks like was the same requirement or similar. It required that all commercial buildings, not residential. No, it didn't apply to mixed use. It just said all commercial buildings. And so now it's proposed to be expanded to mixed use and residential other than single family.
The intent was for every building on Main Street and Francis that had the new lateral lines put in to get sprinklers. When you start breaking it into mixed use, we would still consider a business or mercantile on the first floor and a residential on the second floor. We would consider that
You're
a
still
commercial building.
considering that commercial. Yeah, I could see that.
Now, if it's a townhouse, like there, I think there's one or two over on Francis, that if you look at it, is pretty much all residential, owned by a single and occupied by either one or two families, then I think that would be something that may not fit into that definition.
The original definition. And there aren't that many of those?
Not on,
said just-
none on Main Street really, and maybe a
Yeah.
couple on Francis.
Okay, so it sounds like this isn't a huge change then in that regard, but it does change the timeline, because again, as it was originally written in 2007, it was also just a flat-out requirement, and they were all supposed to have had it done no later than 5 years after passage, so 2012 or so. If they had a lateral line that was adjacent to the property. So the new language, same thing, except it pushes it out to say no later than 2027. So I'm guessing one of my questions is, how many gaps are there in how many buildings have not added sprinklers downtown?
So just to correct that, go ahead.
Yeah, can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
This does not expand the sprinkler system program at all. What it does, paragraph 1, A1, clarifies that commercial means mixed use
Right.
and residential, that if there's apartments on the second and third floor and commercial on the first floor, the entire building still needs to be sprinklered.
Yeah.
That's what that's about. The dates that are in there, the ordinance, the original law said when this, 5 years from when this certain ordinance is passed. That date is 5 years after that ordinance is
Yeah,
passed.
so 2012.
Yeah, so it's the same.
Yeah.
So
But
that-
this is extended to 2027.
So I just want to make a correction. That actually was passed in 2022 by Alderwoman Ellie Tierney. That was a 5-year mark. So I don't know which ordinance we're reading off, but I know that the legislation was passed in 2022, and that date was from that date to 2027. So if you do 2022, 5 years is going to be 2027. So I'm just a little bit confused on that ordinance. It should not be 2007. It shouldn't go that far back. The change was really done back in 2022. So I'm just want to just clarify that, and maybe we can,
Well, I think that should be clarified. The code, oh, I see, it references 2007 and then 2022.
here's,
Right, but here's the date.
right. The date on that 2027 is correct, but what I'm saying, he's going back to 2012, I'm sorry. It shouldn't be 2012, it should be 20.
Well, that's fine. It's neither here nor there. The more pertinent question I have would be, how many gaps are there? How many properties are not sprinklered down there?
So currently, we're at 51% of Main Street already sprinklered. So we have just another 49%. And actually, that number's coming down because we have currently a few that are actually already installing the sprinkler system.
So 51 are sprinkled?
Yeah. I'm sorry, what was that again?
You said 51%
Yeah,
are sprinkled right now?
51%.
And that Main Street, what about Francis?
Francis,
We include both of them in that calculation.
yeah, it was, I'm sorry, that was included in both calculations.
Okay.
Franklin and Francis and Main Street, my apologies.
So how many of those have lateral lines?
All the way, Green Street, all the way up to the very top of Main Street. And Francis.
So the ones that, all
Yeah,
the way
so
from
basically
green
the
up, so
lateral
basically
lines-
all the buildings
Almost,
have
but
lateral
like for
lines.
example, where historic Annapolis has their museum.
Yeah.
91, 93 Main, lateral lines were not made for that little block of Main Street. Because those are Main Street addresses as well.
Okay, so we should, well, my point is we should have more than 51% at this point then.
So 51% from the lateral lines. So the ones that have lateral lines.
The
That
ones that
access to
have
lateral-
51% of the ones who have lateral lines are,
Correct, have been sprinkled.
but the remaining 49% that have lateral lines,
Have not been sprinkled.
but the code says they should have been years ago.
They should be what, I'm
They
sorry?
should have been sprinklered.
Well, they have until 2027.
Okay, so that's what was passed in 2022 is
Yes.
to 27. Okay.
Correct.
So what's the plan to get everybody in compliance by then? That's 2 years from now, right?
So one of the things,
Well,
I think
it's less than
recently,
that, right? It's a year and a half.
yeah, recently, well, like I said, recently we kind of, because we've been getting more inquiries about getting it sprinklered. That's why we're trying to work on some FAQs and trying to work with economic development to give information out.
Yeah,
To remind, because we actually sent letters, the city sent letters, and that's why everybody's like, hey, well, letters are coming out from the city that we need to get sprinklered. They gave him pamphlets with the information. They gave him, to all the owners on Main Street and on Francis.
So I'm a little, I mean, I see the reason for getting sprinklered. We want to make sure that we can keep the historic buildings. We don't want a disaster to happen. But it also just seems like, so how many buildings is 49% that we need to get sprinklered?
Let me get that information 1 second.
Okay. Yeah.
So out of the total 96 buildings, we have 51 buildings that have sprinklers and 45 that do not. And again, this includes Main Street and Francis Street.
So I'm just wondering if we're setting ourselves up for failure or a confrontation here as far as with the businesses and the owners, because again, I see the reason for doing it, but we would essentially have to tell all 45 owners that they have a year and a half to, well, no, it's February, so I guess it'd be, well, it's not either, it's just 1 year, right? I mean, it's 2 years. So they'd have 2 years to get this done. That's a lot of buildings to get, especially you're saying how long the entire process from beginning to end takes roughly how long?
A year
For a
to even
building.
get a year to even like negotiate with installation.
So a year to get the permit and then another probably, I don't know, half a year, if that, maybe on the high end to get, so a year and a half to get stuff installed,
Yeah,
to get from beginning to end.
Right. So like I said, recently over the summer, these letters were resent to the business owners. And I believe that's when everyone started inquiring. The 5-year date, when it was done back in 2022, I think it was just a number that they gave. Realistically, our office would say maybe 10 years from the initial 2022 date. Because I think it does give, like you said, it is a process and it will give time. Again, I can't speak behalf of Alderwoman Ellie Tierney. That was the time that was the one that introduced the legislation. Our office, as anyone in the fire service, will always be in support of having sprinklers
Yeah.
anywhere and everywhere. So I understand what you're saying, and I believe that 2 years is cutting it really close. But I think that if we could extend that due date to give time to the building owners to be able to have that sprinkled, I think that would be a pretty good idea.
So what you were saying is the original date of the legislation was, I'm sorry, Alderman Savage, I'm stepping on your toes.
That's right. Well, so yeah, I guess what I would ask, that I'm not quite ready to give a recommendation today, at least personally, because I think we need to get some more information. One would be, I think this, let me look at this. I can't remember if this is in the staff report or not. Let's see. As far as, I think it needs to get stated that on average, it's going to take a year and a half for a business to do this. So we'd have to send a business a letter and say, you need to start this process by May of 2025, right? Because in order to be compliant with what's proposed. Is that really reasonable to ask 49 businesses to start on this huge process within 5 months? That's that's my question. So if you guys think that needs to get pushed back, I think we need to know a proposal as far as what you would recommend pushing it back to, right? I also think related to that, the fiscal impact note and the staff report need to get updated, because if you guys are all of a sudden going to have to review 49 applications, that's going to, and Ms. Stewart's going to have to work with the businesses that may have a bit of a cost to it, potentially. I mean, I guess you're already doing the work anyway, so it's not like it's not necessarily a new cost. Just thinking out loud here with this.
Yeah, and I think if we need to just discuss also too, like there's the sprinkler system assistance fund that the city has as well. So there's other things that are helping those that are in the city as well. So
How much is in that?
That's Department of Finance.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, we don't touch that. We don't have.
Well, that should be in the staff report, and I don't see it in there at all. So I think if you guys can mention that to staff, that really, because that's an important part of this. I just don't want to be giving an impossible task to the businesses, and I think we should hear from Ms. Stewart as far as if she's heard anything from the businesses and what this could potentially. And so anyway, on a related question, is there any kind of waiver process? Like if could somebody come and make the case that, look, this is going to be too impactful to the historic structure, it's just not feasible to do it in light of when you need to preserve historic character? Does that ever come up? Is that something that is managed in the code?
Not on Main Street. You know, if you have like the Bryce House or something like that, that would be a historic inside and out. You know, everything you do in there is going to have an impact on it. There's concessions in the code that we can apply, but oftentimes those are more expensive than just putting your sprinkler system in. Those are reserved for aesthetic type things and preserving history.
Okay, it might be worth getting some feedback from our historic preservationists as far as what they may have heard. Sorry, those are, let's see. Yeah, those are basically my questions. Thank you, that's all.
I'd agree with your assessment that I'm also not ready to make a recommendation on this. I had invited our planning and zoning department to join us. They unfortunately were not able to join us today because I did want to talk to them about some of the other permitting issues. Knowing that it takes a year to get before government even gets involved, and that's just with the private sector of trying to negotiate contracts, find an architect, find an installer, and negotiate all those, and then when government gets involved, how long that process takes. We are setting ourselves up for failure.
Yes, I'm worried about, yeah.
I am interested in knowing that even though we had originally done a 5-year deadline, that our office had recommended a 10-year deadline, and I would appreciate, am I remembering that correctly, what you had said?
What's that again, sir?
The original legislation that had passed that said a 5-year deadline, but
That's correct. That was the 5-year deadline that Alderman Tierney.
so I don't know if this legislation is the right place to do this, although if we are updating the code, we might as well do it.
Do what?
We might as well, I don't know if this legislation is the right place to update that deadline or not. That might be something to discuss internally amongst our colleagues, but I do think that's something we should strongly consider, is kicking back that deadline to what our fire marshal's office had originally recommended.
Yeah, I think we could. It's in the legislation.
Yeah. If we could add to our staff report, please, Ms. Reuter. 1, the amount of money in our sprinkler fund. 2, how many buildings are not in compliance. And I would ask that our fire marshal's office please get this information to Ms. Reuter. How much money or how many buildings are not in compliance with currently with not being sprinklered. The original recommendation from your office for that 10-year deadline versus that 5-year deadline. So what that new date could theoretically be had it been a 10-year deadline. Alderman Savage, what were the other things you'd wished added to the staff report?
So you got the number of the buildings. If there's any additional costs, there might not be. I know it's going to take a lot of staff time, but not necessarily a direct cost on the city's end. But Oh, the sprinkler fund, did you say that?
Yes.
Okay. And can I ask something else?
Yes.
Might be for the law office. In legislation on page 2, line 31, the number 3 there, it mentions the February 28th, 2022 date. But that, again, it sounds like this is no later than 5 years. So I guess that's the 2027 date. Okay, never mind. So if the department does recommend a change, we'll have to change both number 2 and number 3 as far as the final date. And did we want to get into the amendment at all?
We can get into the amendments, but I'd like to cover the staff time
Okay.
report because I do know our fire marshal's office does want to get out of here relatively soonish. There were some deadlines, but if we could please have those updated in our staff report by our next Economic Matters meeting. I know the holidays are coming up, so I'm not expecting an immediate turnaround during the holiday or during New Year's, but if it's possible to have that updated by our next Economic Matters meeting, I would be appreciated. And if by our next Economic Matters meeting, if we can ensure someone from Planning and Zoning is here so that they can answer some of our permitting questions on their side of the equation, because permitting time matters in this, especially if we do end up keeping this original deadline. We need to have a very efficient permitting process.
Yeah.
So gentlemen, I thank you for your time on this front while we discuss our amendment here, but I think you're dismissed.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
Thank you.
So we are in agreement. I don't want to make a recommendation on the legislation as a whole, but I would like to discuss Amendment 1. Amendment 1 came out of the Rules in City Government, and the goal was to add include single-family residential in the sprinkler process as well. Now, we don't have detached single-family residential in the downtown area, but it was to basically try to expand out away from the commercial and mixed use into also the residential area.
Okay.
I respectfully disagreed with this one, but I understand where my colleagues were coming from. My thought process is this would be adding an extra burden to an already tight deadline and already likely to be overburdened process. My colleagues in the Rules of City Government focused on this will increase the safety of the buildings, which is objectively accurate. As our fire marshal said, we want buildings sprinklered. It will make things safer, and we do live in a very tight area, and we want to keep fires from spreading. This is all objectively true.
Could I offer maybe a bit of a compromise? Because I think just based on working with you for the period of time I have, I think you would be inclined to support and want to encourage multi-residential,
Yes.
right? Not just single. And this is focused on single-family houses. So maybe we could incorporate in a future amendment where the deadline would get pushed back even further for multifamily, right? So that would keep single-family would still have to comply because we essentially want to kind of discourage that, right?
Yes. If the deadline got pushed back on this, I feel like a lot of my concerns would be dealt with. I suppose in that case, while we figure out if we want to add the deadline or not, we don't need to take any action on Amendment 1 for now.
Okay. Yeah.
So we can
Sounds good.
just set this aside and take no action for the time being and pick it back up at our next Economic Matters hearing.
Sounds good.
All righty. So we will take no action for today and continue our discussion on O3224 at the next Economic Matters hearing. Up next, yes, that is a postponement. So I will
no
ask for a
action.
motion of postponement on O3224 until our next Economic Matters hearing.
Second.
All right, all in favor? Aye. All right, up next, ID 2024 Economic Development Update. Hope, Ms. Stewart, please come.
Thanks for keeping everything so
Efficient,
efficient, yes.
a hallmark of Economic Matters meetings.
And economic development appreciates it. So Hope Stewart, Small Minority Business Liaison. I first just wanted to follow up on some of the things the fire marshals were talking about. The pre-application meetings are very valuable. Anytime somebody comes to us with questions about a potential business, we always recommend it. I think it's one of the best ways that we are becoming more business friendly. I would encourage any of you to sit in on one at some time just to hear what's discussed. It's a way for people to talk out their plans even before they sign a lease, to know what's possible, what permits they might need. So, yeah.
I should have asked this while our fire marshals were here, and I guess I'll ask this next meeting. Are these offered by Zoom or
They
virtually?
are, or
Okay.
Google Meets.
Google Meets? Wonderful.
Yeah, so anybody can join. It makes it so much easier because sometimes the architects are from out of town, so, or the applicants, so. And we are also, Economic Development is happy to support the fire marshal with whatever needs to be done. One of our concerns is when and there's a difference between the business owners and the property owners, because we are talking about the property owners here. But in order to put in these sprinklers, they do need to close the businesses. So we might have a fund for putting in the sprinklers, but what are we going to do to, accommodate the businesses that need to close during this time? So this is all something we need to take into consideration, and I support your idea of pushing back the deadline.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Alderman Savage?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a question on that. Have you seen any signs or indicators that this would potentially discourage businesses from opening?
I think it is one of the things that does, well, it's what discourages some of the property owners from putting in the sprinklers.
Okay, right. So
Because
this targets the property owners. Yeah.
it does involve closing a business. So when a business closes, we've had some businesses closing, the Sunglass Hut, for instance, I don't know if they're sprinklered or not, I don't have the list. That would be a good time for them to get it taken care of. And the other thing to take into consideration are, the property owners, because that's just, it's, owners versus businesses, it's two different things.
Yeah, right. And this targets the property owners. So if they are given this, it would impact the business in that they would have to close for at least 3 to 6 months, depending on how long the construction is going to take. And then, but I guess hopefully the property owner won't pass along those costs to the renter, but you never know.
It does.
Yeah. So it potentially would drive up rent costs.
It's just something to keep into, take into consideration.
We have to do, but it's
Right.
just a matter of, now if we have a sprinkler fund that's functioning and being utilized, I don't think it's ever been utilized.
It
by
has.
recollection. Oh, it has?
Yes, by some Main Street businesses. I know Joe Rubino is one of the property owners, and he's a big advocate of this. He says it's been very helpful for him because he's been able to rent out the top buildings, so.
Yeah, because I
the
guess
top floors.
if we have 49 businesses that need to comply, I don't know how much we would have to put into the sprinkler fund to make it work.
A significant number. I do see the merits of this regulation. It does objectively improve safety.
Yeah, sure.
But this is certainly something, and discussing this with certain property owners, some have just gone, we don't want to deal with sprinklers, and they've sold their buildings. Others have been like, we see the merits, we want to take care of our people, we want to keep safe, but our process is so Byzantine, hectic, we don't want to deal with HAs, regulations, and city permitting process and delays there, that is our headache and heartache.
Right.
And so I feel like if we can address a lot of our permitting and regulation issues on that front, we can get a lot faster results on that and have less heartburn on the sprinklers themselves. Because again, it objectively makes things safer. I see the rationale and the good of this regulation. It's not like something like an arbitrary number that stops businesses from opening in the name of glorious giant asphalt spreading things out.
No, I mean,
Requirements.
our downtown historic district, I can't even imagine what our economy would look like without that. So, yeah, horrific fire would be terrible.
Yes. So this is a regulation that makes sense and is good, but when you add this on top of a very slow permitting process and other contradictory Byzantine regulations, it adds cost and heartburn, and I feel for that. So what are these other regulations and efficiencies that we can find and either remove or make better and faster? But anyway, let's get into the meat of your presentation.
Okay, so my updates, as you know, we have the disparity study that my office has been fighting for a very, very long time. It's the study that examines our procurement contracts with small women-owned, minority-owned, and service-disabled veteran-owned businesses. We have a proposal team now made up of me as the chair, Casey Ortiz from Planning and Zoning, Brian Paquin from MIT, Betsy McEwen from Public Works, and Oriana Ornelas from Transportation. My gathering of these individuals is based on which departments probably utilize the most bids and services from procurement. So we wanted to make sure that they had a say in this. As I said, the deadline closes on December 20th, so we'll have everybody review the proposals. I don't know how many there are at the moment. And then we will convene to choose a consultant.
And what was this for again?
The
Sorry,
disparity study.
Oh, okay.
How many current applicants do we have?
I don't know that. I have not been informed of that by our procurement officer yet. I will find out when the deadline closes.
When the deadline closes on the 20th, could you please alert the members of the committee?
I can, yeah.
Thank you.
Another update that I definitely wanted to bring to your attention, Alderman Schandelmeyer, because I know this is an important issue for you. As you know, you put in funds in fiscal year 24, 50,000 for a maritime apprenticeship program. And those funds were not spent in fiscal year 24, and they were not reappropriated in fiscal year 25. So we are now ready to move forward with the apprenticeship program. I had a meeting with Workforce Development and the Maritime Trades Association of Maryland. They're very excited about this, but at the moment, we don't have that 50K anymore to give them. So I am checking with Chris Jakubiak about coming before Finance Committee to ask for a supplemental appropriation to request this funding, because I think it's very important.
I would agree. A little frustrated that we weren't able to spend that originally, but is there anything that we as a committee can do to assist in that supplemental appropriation?
I think just, when we put forward this request, just try to get it funded, and we promise we will have it spent by the end of this fiscal year.
Excellent. So the Maritime Trades Association of Maryland is our partner in that?
They are. They will be partnering with the Workforce Development Corporation.
Excellent.
It'll be the three of us working together. And we had a meeting last week, and yeah, I think things are moving in a really great direction, and we'll have another follow-up meeting next month.
When do we think we can get the supplemental appropriation request in?
I will check with Chris and find out when does the Finance Committee meet next? It should be January, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Am I foolishly optimistic by asking, can we get this in by our second full council meeting in January?
You know what? I would love to do that. So if you're foolishly optimistic, then I am as well, because quite honestly, this is embarrassing to me that we have to go and tell them that we don't have this money. So I want to be able to tell them as soon as possible that we do have this money again.
Thank you. If you need advocates to come before the Finance Committee or at least send pleading emails, please let us know. I am happy to go before my colleagues and explain the original purpose of the money and beg and cajole and plead.
I'm hopeful that everybody will understand the value in this program.
This will create jobs.
It will create jobs, and it'll create jobs for not only our local community, but the number one challenge for our maritime industry right now in the city is actually finding employees.
Especially as a piggyback off of our very successful economic gardening program.
Correct. And that was the number one feedback they gave us. So if we want a strong maritime industry here, we need to be able to provide them with employees, and local employees are, preferable. So,
Excellent.
yeah. The next update. So, Alderwoman O'Neill had proposed a Clay Street Housing Entrepreneurship Redevelopment Opportunities Program, and she put forth $25,000. So we've now distributed that. It's kind of a training program in the Clay Street community, and it will, try to help the residents learn how to start businesses, and they're really interested in reaching out to other business districts in the city to find out how they can kind of really create a strong business environment within their community. So we're ready to get that off the ground.
Is there anything the committee can do to be assistance on that?
You know what? We will definitely let you know, but yeah.
Excellent.
They've got in the money, so that's our first start. You know, that's the most important thing.
Excellent. Now, any further updates?
No, that's it.
Well, one thing that I would like to personally comment on is we seem to be having very successful Midnight Madnesses.
Yes.
I do wish next time we could at least attempt to try a car-free one to make our main street similar to the Charlottesville Mall and other very successful pedestrian malls we see in other cities similar to Annapolis. I do think that would make a fantastic place and get a little more people out and about to explore our wonderful Main Street. But
I personally support that.
thank
so.
you. But that is something that we will try again next year. And Alderman Savage, do you have anything further?
Yeah, just on that point, thank you. You know, we asked Mr. Rice before he left. Unfortunately, he left before we didn't know this, but to do some research, because in preparation for doing this next year, as far as potentially closing down Main Street or other streets, we need to get some data on, well, from other jurisdictions, for example, on what they call bikeonomics we learned about in the Netherlands. So building up and educating the businesses, perhaps with some events or flyers, information that can explain to them how getting cars off of roadway opens up opportunities for increased traffic and activity to draw people downtown, and makes it more comfortable and welcoming to people, right? Because it's safe and it's quieter and et cetera, et cetera. So I just think the businesses are very wary of it, and they're even wary of it abroad. When we were talking to them in the Netherlands about this, once it happens, they see the benefit, but I think we need to do what we can to limit the blowback. And part of that's going to, I think, be, you know, from your office as far as what you might be able to help with.
Yeah, I think
to
that
that
that'll
end.
take a series of meetings, probably stakeholder meetings, to talk to the businesses about that, have them discuss their concerns, listen to their concerns, and maybe, as you said, provide research as to, you know, how we might be able to address this. I went to school in Stanton, Virginia. It's a smaller city in the Shenandoah Valley, and I went back and recently visited, and they actually have a few blocks that are closed. And so people can come out, they've got musicians playing, you've got outdoor dining, it's nice, so, yeah, but there are businesses that are concerned about this, and especially concerned about losing parking in front of their stores, so we will get pushback if we try.
Yeah.
Something I will say is I did walk 4 miles round trip to go buy my wedding ring from Zachary's Jewelers. If you have wonderful products, people will come. And our downtown offers wonderful products. And I will always recommend people go to explore the Charlottesville Mall. Is a good way to see what happens when you pedestrianize an area. And it is certainly worth trying.
Yeah, no,
At least
Cumberland
one
has
night.
one as well. Cumberland has a nice one.
Oh,
Alderman Savage, you have any further questions for Ms. Stewart?
no.
I have no further questions as well.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us, and look at that. We get you out of here before 6:30.
I know, perfect. Thank you so much.
All righty. Is there anything further for the good of the order? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.